one should say goodbye. Nocturnal Transmissions is proud to present Rory Say's The Departure. My first taste of freedom resulted from a funeral. Who had died was nobody important, only some never-mentioned great aunt or uncle, perhaps, or nameless distant cousin. All that mattered to Sarah and I was the unexpected promise of being left alone in the house while our parents paid their respects. How we were to manage this was detailed to us days in advance. We were not to answer callers on the phone or at the front door. We were not to enter certain rooms upstairs or touch certain appliances in the kitchen. We were to avoid windows. And of course it went entirely without saying, although it still was said and reiterated, that we were not to leave the house for any reason. Sarah, having 2 digits to her age, was appointed the role of leader. My duty was to place trust in her judgment and do as I was told. Even so, we were tested separately about our responsibilities, thoroughly and repeatedly, until, standing in the hall as our parents lingered on the steps under a shared umbrella, we could each recite them one after the other, like the meaningless words of the national anthem. We watched them as they went, smiling and lifting our arms from the open front door whenever one of them turned with an anxious wave. I could feel Sarah's excitement building beside me, my own like a warm ball expanding in my stomach. We kept watching even after they had rounded the corner at the end of the lane, as if this moment we had waited for might turn out to be only some further test, one which we would fail as soon as the door was closed. Finally, I looked to Sarah for instruction. Her face no longer needed to hide its excitement. She let out a loud, laughing cry as she pulled me by the arm back inside, slammed the door shut with a vicious kick, and turned to face me. "What's wrong with you?" she asked. The question stunned me. "Nothing," I said. "You look scared of something." "I'm not scared of anything." We stood looking at each other's faces. A clock you could almost never hear clicked the seconds out from under us. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Follow me," said Sarah. She reached out for my wrist and led me up the stairs at a run. We began with the rooms we weren't meant to enter. One was filled with books and papers and very little else. A low desk with a tall brass lamp standing beside it faced the far wall, and nearby a frayed armchair sat next to the room's only window, a head-sized diamond of dirty glass. I felt a hardness in my throat when I thought of all the hours my father spent in this room with the door closed behind him. What in his life, I wondered, had condemned him to such a place? A room across the hall housed our mother's delicate musical instruments. We'd never heard them played or even seen them up close, but now Sarah handled a few and asked me things about them. How did I guess they worked, and what sorts of sounds did I think they could make? I told her I didn't know. Maybe they were broken, I said, and couldn't make sounds any longer. Sarah said they didn't look broken. Probably they were just forgotten about, like those old toys of ours we kept in the red chest down in the cellar. To prove this, she drew the backs of her fingernails down the strings of some wall-mounted contraption nearly as long as herself, and the high screech like the cry of a tortured cat sent us running back down to the hall. Sarah next led the way through to our parents' bedroom, holding jewelry to her ears and throat as she frowned into our mother's mirror. Sometimes when we stopped talking and the quiet crept back in, it felt like there was someone else, like someone stood at the bottom of the stairs or behind some other door, silent, straining to hear the next noise we might make. "Do you want what Mum left?" Sarah asked after one wordless stretch. We'd come down the stairs and entered the kitchen like a pair of sleepwalkers. "I don't think so." I opened the fridge and looked at the plate of sandwiches, crusts cut and shiny in see-through wrapping. Sarah had gone silent. She stood by the back window at the end of the kitchen, holding the blind slats aside with one arm. I shut the fridge and joined her. More brightness and colour than we had seen in weeks lay out beyond the window. Even as we'd waved at the backs of our parents a half-hour earlier, the rain had come down in a cold spit, just as it had almost every moment since before the new year. But now the dark lid held over us had been lifted, revealing a sky out of another world's spring. "Do you know when they'll be back?" I asked with a hand to the glass. "In a while," said Sarah. "Go and put your shoes on." We'd searched the kitchen cupboards for money and found none. "We'll ask someone for money," said Sarah. "Ask who?" I had to hurry to keep up with her long strides down the pavement. "Anyone, I've done it before." At the corner around which we'd seen our parents disappear, we turned in the other direction. We knew this journey well, a stretch of 3 blocks we walked every Saturday morning with our pocket money safe in our fists. It felt different now, though. "What if they come back early?" "They won't," Sarah said, her face grim with purpose. "But how can you know that?" "It's a funeral," she said, as if that settled everything. "Don't you know what happens at a funeral?" We came to a stop at the road we needed to cross, waiting, it seemed, for invisible cars to pass by. No one could be seen in any direction. "There might be someone inside we can ask," said Sarah, "or we can stay here until someone turns up." And at this suggestion, someone did. We watched the shop's front door swing open across the street, and a man emerge from inside. He seemed already to be looking at us. There was a smile on his face, and he waved as if we knew him. "Excuse me, mister." Sarah was halfway across the street before I could bring myself to follow. The man met us at the curb. He looked old enough to be called an old man, though the skin of his face was smooth, and the dark suit he wore was much like the one we'd seen our father put on earlier that morning. His neatly combed black hair glistened in the sunlight. I hid myself behind Sarah when I reached her. "Me and my brother were sent to the store to get some things," she bravely announced, "but our parents forgot to give us money." The old man's smile sealed his lips. He leaned forward. "Are you asking me for money?" he said quietly. Sarah might have nodded or even said something in reply, but in that moment all I could do was watch as the dark-suited man straightened and plunged his hand into a trouser pocket. There was no sound of change being searched for, and yet when his hand reappeared, there was no mistaking what it held. First he sprinkled coins into Sarah's cupped palms, then into mine. I heard my sister's voice say, "Thank you." The man nodded encouragingly. I found I wasn't as frightened by his face as I was by the faces of most older people. It might have been that it brought to mind my mother's. He had the same beakish nose and lack of chin, the same light blue eyes that always looked wet and ready to trip. Then Sarah had me by the arm. I kicked the back of my foot and almost tripped as she dragged me around the man and across the boulevard. I could feel the keen pressure of his gaze on the back of my skull until the shop's door was closed behind us. The coins still felt cold in my hand. Pausing to count them, I realized I held the exact sum of my weekly allowance. Ahead, by the shelved jars of sweets, I saw that Sarah had made the same discovery. She frowned into her hand, then closed her fingers and took a little plastic bag from a box beneath the jars. We said nothing as we made our selections. Only after we had paid the woman at the counter did I say, "What if he's still outside?" Sarah bit the end off a sugar-coated blue string. "So what?" she said. "He was nice to us. I told you all we had to do was ask somebody." So I followed her back out into the cold sunlight. The old man still stood where we'd left him, the only difference being that he now had his back to a car that had appeared in the street. It looked like no car I had seen before. Its long black body stretched almost to the length of a bus, its windows dark as dead television screens. The man waved us over. At first I thought he only wanted whatever change we might have left, but as we drew near he opened wide the door behind him and ushered us inside the car. Sarah, paying no mind to my sharp glance, moved forward. "We have to be home soon," she said to the man, who assured her that we would be. I hissed her name as I followed her inside the car. "What?" she said back, annoyed. But by then it was too late. The man ducked in after us, shutting the door with a soft click. My eyes took a moment to adjust to the sudden dark. I hadn't noticed beforehand the little curtains that hung from the ceiling to cover the windows, allowing only slits of daylight to cut through at the edges. Sarah and I sat huddled while the old man faced us from the center of an opposite row of seats, our knees nearly touching. Behind his head was a small sliding door, which, after we'd settled ourselves, he opened to give whispered instructions to an unseen driver. Something kept me from lifting the nearest curtain as the engine came almost soundlessly to life. Hardly had the car started moving before I noticed the old man's eyes blink themselves closed. I ate my sweets as I watched his lips part and his jaw droop open. Sarah, who'd begun humming some high, tuneless melody, seemed oblivious. Finally, I elbowed her ribs. She looked up from her knees to the man's face, then kicked him in the shin. "We have to be home soon," she said, impressively demanding. The old man's eyes fluttered open. He looked at us for a moment, needing to remind himself perhaps of who we were. Then he smiled. "Where would you like to go?" he asked. "If you could be taken anywhere in the world." Sarah seemed to consider this. "Back to our house," I said, and gave her another nudge. The old man looked at me as though I'd offended him.
such a lack of imagination,"
he said, then turned again to silently converse with our apparent driver. The car stopped as soon as the slot was snapped shut. Stepping outside, I found that we had parked directly in front of our house. Sarah came out behind me. We both stood still, looking up at the curtained windows, at the man on his way to the front door. "Have this," Sarah said, and stuffed her bag of sweets in my pocket. "I don't want any more." I glared at her. "I guess let's go back inside," she said. "But what if he knows Mum and Dad?" "Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't." "But how else would he know where we live? What if he tells them we left the house?" Sarah said nothing. I wanted to hit her, but I knew the man was watching from the front steps. He had used a key attached to a ring of many others to open the door, and now he called us to come inside. "I don't want to go in with him," I said to Sarah. "You were supposed to be the leader." She calmly looked me in the eye. "I am the leader," she said, and brought me by the wrist up the front steps, past the stranger, waiting at the door. It struck me at once that they might be home, that they sat just now in the living room with their black clothes still damp from the morning rain, ready to tell us we could never again be trusted. And yet, once I placed my shoes on the rack in the hall and felt the return of that empty quiet, like midnight in the afternoon, I knew they were still gone. The old man told us that we must be hungry. He knew about some sandwiches, he said, and we followed him to the kitchen.
"Milk or juice?"
he asked as he set the plate down on the breakfast table and peeled off the plastic wrap. "Milk," said Sarah. I said nothing and was given milk as well. The rain had returned. I could hear it whispering on the grass in the yard, and when the old man parted the slats at the window to gaze outside as we ate behind him, I saw the world as it had been that morning. "Do you know when our parents will be home?" Sarah asked.
"Yes,"
the man said, not turning from the window. Sarah took a long sip of milk, held it in her mouth, and swallowed. "When?" she asked.
"Just after we leave."
"And when will you leave?" The old man took a moment to answer.
"In about 4 minutes,"
he said. When I finished my sandwich, I took out Sarah's bag of sweets and ate a few of them and then put the bag back in my pocket.
"Would one of you like to come with me?"
The man dropped the slats and turned to face us.
"It could be arranged quite easily."
I tried to catch Sarah's eye from across the table. She had finished her milk and now held the glass up to her face, as though there was something at the bottom I couldn't see. My foot fell short when I kicked for her legs. "I would," she said, and placed the empty glass down in front of her.
"Do you mean it?"
The man's voice became serious. "But you can't go!" I broke in, and finally Sarah looked in my direction, her eyes vague and indifferent.
"Of course you can,"
the old man said. He came closer and placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder.
"It's entirely up to her."
I felt tears sting the backs of my eyes.
No,
I said, shaking my head.
Our parents will be back in just a few minutes.
Now, the man lowered himself and whispered into Sarah's ear. She nodded, listening, then slid from her chair and wandered past me, out to the front hall.
Where are you going?
I called after her, but it was the man who answered.
I'm afraid it's best if you don't. No.
At the sound of the front door opening, I ran out to the hall. Sarah was there, past the doorway, approaching that long black car in the pelting rain. Then the man was in front of me.
It's important that you stay inside,
he said. I leaned sideways, trying to see past him.
It's important that you keep this door closed until your mother and father come home.
He raised a hand as he backed up to the front steps.
What I want you to do is to shut your eyes and count down the final minute. Do you know how many seconds make a minute?
I told him how many.
Very good.
He took another step back.
I'm going to close the door now.
My eyes were already closed. It was easy to count the seconds. All I had to do was keep track of the clicking from that clock, like a bodily sound inside myself. The door opened with my eyes at 60. In came my parents, first my mother, then my father, both of them soaked, their long black coats spilling rain on the hardwood floor.
What are you doing standing there?
My mother asked.
Nothing,
I said, truthfully enough. They busied themselves with their shoes and coats. My father shook out the umbrella over the steps before shutting the door and wiping the cold from his face. The car outside was gone.
And were you all right looking after yourself?
I nodded. Fine. My mother tossed a little pamphlet next to the telephone on the side table, and when my eyes touched the face on the front page, it was like half the blood inside me went somewhere else.
You're not hungry, are you?
My mother stroked the top of my head as she moved past me and into the kitchen.
Did you eat your lunch yet?
No, I said.
Yes, I'm not hungry. I ate my lunch.
Good man, said my father, mounting the staircase next to where I stood, frozen to the floor. He might have been younger in the picture, but the face was just the same. I tried to puzzle out what this meant. If my parents knew the old man, which clearly they did they also know where he had taken Sarah? I turned the pamphlet over to its blank underside and made my way upstairs. The door to my father's room of books closed just as I came into the upper hallway. All the doors were closed, except for the one to the bedroom Sarah and I shared. But as I entered our room, I found nothing of my sister. Where her bed had been across from mine sat the old red chest from the cellar. Lifting its lid, I saw none of her dolls or brightly colored stuffed unicorns among the tangle of toys. I went to the closet and found none of her shirts or dresses hanging next to my own clothes. There were no pictures cut from magazines taped slantways to the walls, no glow-in-the-dark stickers of stars and crescent moons stuck to the ceiling. Everything in the room belonged to me. My mother appeared in the doorway. I could tell at once from her eyes that she somehow failed to notice all the things that were missing. She asked me if fish would be all right for dinner. I must have nodded, or said yes, because then she made to leave, before turning back to tell me that I was lucky to have stayed home from the funeral. Once she was gone, I looked around the room some more for any trace of Sarah. It was my fingers that found her. From my pocket I took out the nearly empty bag of sweets she'd given me. There were only 4 left, each of them ones she liked and I didn't. I put one in my mouth and let it sit there for a while, feeling it shrink on my tongue. It tasted better than I remembered. I went over to my bed, sat down on the covers, and ate the last 3. The Departure by Rory Say. If that name sounds familiar, well, it is, gentle listener. This is, as a matter of fact, the 4th time we have featured his writing on the podcast. If you're interested in binging his back catalogue, it is as follows. Episode 63, Heaven Unearthed. Episode 103, Winter. Episode 140, The Different Face. And of course, you've just heard The Departure on this, our 179th episode. If, like us, you enjoy Mr. Say's work, he has just recently released a mini-story collection. It's titled Different Faces and is being put out by indie weird horror publisher Dim Shores. You can order it from dimshores.bigcartel.com. We'll put a link in our featured authors section for you. And now, let's turn our gaze towards that magnificent pantheon of horror aficionados, our Patreon subscribers, whose ranks I see distinguished by a brand new cohort. Former beloved acolyte, now esteemed cohort, Heathen Soul. Thank you for your support, Heathen Soul. Bless your black little heart. And I see you're not the only one making waves in the Patreon pool. We are also joined by 4 new acolytes. Metallic Owl, Deirdre Hannah, Bruhemian Hidalgo, and Bacheli Isata. Hello, Metallic Owl, Deirdre, Bruhemian, and Bacheli. Welcome. And now the sad time of our departure has arrived. This transmission was brought to you with the generous assistance of our aforementioned Patreon subscribers. A particular thank you goes out to our esteemed cohorts. Evan Dooley, Arnie Frank, Joanne Brooker, Eugene Petrie, Alex Brewis, Wayne Prince, Amanda Moore, Kel Wielden, Fabled Words. Shh, just listen. Tippy Polo, J.B., Wildy, Thomas Funderburk, Daniel Kamienkowski, Brett Allen, Rachel Brown, Adam, Johnny Kelly, Alicia Townsend, Sam Hankins, Mudkip, Boole Swivney, Azaran Warrens, Daniel Clanton, Robert Troy Hampton Peterson, and Heathen Soul. All non-public domain stories are featured with the permission of the authors. All voices and production are concocted by Kristin Holland. Until next time, as always, watch the skies, fear the dark, and don't trust anyone, especially yourself. Good night, gentle listener.